Hi folks, hopefully we're getting some audio here. There we go. Just taking a look at the moon. Make sure that all of our levels are working properly. Just before I go too far. They are good. Okay. So I've just got the telescope out on the moon there. Actually, I can show you what the rig looks like. Let me just switch windows here. Got a couple of cameras going so that I can see what's going on and I don't have to get up from the living room once it's all set up, which is really nice. Turn on the outside camera, get a bit better exposure here, sorry. Of course, I set things up when it was light outside, and now it's gotten dark. Took about half an hour to get everything focused and things like that, mostly because a lot of the gear was still taken apart from our eclipse event on Monday. I had a lot of the cables and the computer and all that kind of stuff pulled away. And so, there we go. Kind of a weird under the tripod view, but right across the middle is the telescope there, and this is the counterweight that sticks out. So it's pointing up, almost right up overhead. You can't quite see the moon in this picture, it's just behind the roof of the house. But the telescope can see it, and that's all that matters. So we've got a nice, just a day before first quarter, I guess. And let's just go up to a more interesting magnification and we'll take a look here. Now the seeing is terrible. It's rated 0 out of 5 or bad on the various astronomy weather sites. The seeing represents how steady the air is. And when the air is steady, you get a nice crisp view. When the air is not steady, you get all this rippling effect between each individual frame. And it gives you this effect of the whole thing sort of blurring in and out. So there'll be a bunch of blurry images, and then every so often there'll be a nice clear one. So that's kind of what we're hoping for and waiting for. We'll just move the scope along here and find a couple of interesting spots, see if we can get some nice views. This is the southern area of the moon. It's all heavily cratered. We're looking right along what's called the terminator, which is the line between the dark side and the light side of the moon. That's where the shadows are nice and long, and it really shows the relief and the 3D nature of the terrain with the craters and things like that. If you look at the moon more where there's more direct sunlight, like over on the other side, you see a lot of the detail is sort of washed out. And at full moon, when we're seeing the whole moon lit up with no shadows, that's kind of the worst time to look at the moon in many ways because you just can't see that 3D nature. So anyway, let's cruise around the moon here a little bit and just see what we can see. So the moon's terrain is made up of a couple of different kinds of terrain, I guess. You've got the white stuff there that is mostly pretty rocky terrain covered with dust. And then you've got the darker gray areas. Those are actually lava plains where there was an impact back in the day that actually broke through the crust of the moon, and lava bubbled up and filled the crater essentially and solidified, and now we have these flat areas. The ancient sky watchers, the Greeks called them seas or mare, and so that's what they're all named after: the Sea of Crises, the Sea of Tranquility, the Sea of Serenity, those kinds of things. Spoiler, no water there. Let's just make sure everything is going out here. Yep. Excellent. So I'm working on my telescope system that is going to go out to my new remote observatory site that I'm pretty darn excited about. I've got access to a place where it's relatively dark. and I can control the telescope remotely over the internet, just like I do it from my living room, except, it's a longer distance. So I'm just making sure that everything works properly before I get it out in the middle of nowhere, and it's an hour and a half drive to fix something if I forgot to plug in a cable or if something isn't working correctly. So tonight the plan was to, get the camera going and then to work on the guiding. For the moon, we're taking very short exposures here, and so the telescope's automatic tracking just sort of keeps the moon roughly centered, and that's good enough. But when you're taking a long exposure of, say, a galaxy or a nebula or something like that, the telescope's tracking actually isn't perfect compared to the rotation of the Earth, and so you do what's called guiding. There's another camera that looks at a star and just keeps the star on the crosshairs. And if the thing wiggles a little bit because the wind blew the mounts, or because your gears aren't perfect and there's a little bit of a uncertainty on one side or the other, the camera will basically move the telescope to bring the star back to the center. And by keeping that one star centered, you're keeping your whole image centered. And that way the stars stay nice little dots. They don't trail or move around or move, get larger because of all this distortion. So I have to get that working before I can get it all out to the new site. So probably a week or so from now, I'll have the premiere, the first light of the new remote telescope, which for those of you that are interested in gear kind of stuff, is a C8, an 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope that I bought from my friend and planetary imaging mentor, Mike Caracas. And it's going to be, it's a great scope for planets, but I'm going to be using it for now mostly for galaxies and that kind of stuff. So yeah, you can see how bad the turbulence in the atmosphere is here. This is sort of best focus. So I was out there focusing and trying to get things as sharp as possible, and the air is just not cooperating. You'll occasionally see one frame that will be pretty clear, but most of the other ones are very distorted. And that happens a lot when you get these high temperatures in the daytime and then lower temperatures at night. The heat waves basically that you're looking through make it look like you're looking through a swimming pool or something like that. So get all this distortion. Still pretty cool though. I mean, we're basically getting the same view that the Apollo astronauts would have had about halfway to the moon just by using this little telescope and camera. So that's pretty cool. So even these flat areas, the seas, when the light is coming in at a very low angle, you can really see some details in them. The flat areas aren't perfectly flat, and there are sort of little, oops, went the wrong way. Let's bring that down this way. There are little sort of ripples on the floor and all sorts of, wow, that's a little bit too fast. Let's turn that. Yeah, so in this big area in the middle here, there's all these sort of areas that are cast into relief just because the light is hitting them at such a shallow angle. A day from now, that will look perfectly flat because the sun will have risen higher, the shadows disappear, and you lose all that terrain. So the moon looks different every night, and you can see features in a different area of it every night, just based on that solar angle. Wow, the seeing is terrible. The forecast was right. It's really, really bad. Oh, there's a couple of frames there that are kind of clear, but yeah, it's really, really distorting a bit. Now, the other thing that I don't have on this telescope yet is a electric focuser. So I was actually out there turning the knob, focusing, which is not as precise as the electronic one. So once I get the electronic focuser on there, I'll be able to not only adjust the focus from here in the living room, but I'll also be able to get very, very precise in terms of, exactly how much you turn the knob, because those knobs are kind of designed to just go back and forth and get you close. But when you're looking with a camera at high magnification like this, you really need to have the level of precision to get it perfect. And even on a night like this, you probably wouldn't get it much better than this anyway, but on a clear night, it really is essential for getting a nice, good focus. So you can sort of see the different terrain on the moon here. There's lots of impact craters, of course, from asteroids that have smashed into the moon. You can tell which ones are older and which ones are younger, especially when they overlap. Obviously, the one over here at the bottom that overlaps the one to its lower left. Obviously, the one that's on top was formed afterwards. But you can also tell from the brightness, because basically the lunar soil darkens in the sun, kind of suntans. And so when there's a fresh splash, like that little white area right near the center of the frame, sort of to the right a little bit, you get a sort of a splash of bright material that will eventually, over time, darken. So we can actually sort of figure out the age of these craters and how long they've been there. And by studying the moon and other things in the solar system, we sort of realized that the early solar system, there were lots of collisions. There were the sort of a couple of bombardment periods where there was lots of stuff crashing into things, and the moon was getting the stuffing smashed out of it with asteroids and meteors, and so was the Earth. But luckily, that all tapered off a couple billion years ago, and now impacts are fairly rare. Certainly big ones are fairly rare. You still get lots of dust crashing into things, but something that would make a crater like we see on the moon, you don't see that happening very often anymore, which is good for us because that would ruin our whole day. When I was in university, we learned how to calculate the height of these craters by looking at how big the shadows are that they cast. We know where the sun is and where the moon is, and so we sort of know the angle of the sun that's coming in. And so if you measure how big the shadow is of a mountain peak or a crater wall or whatever, you can actually work out how tall that feature is. And before we had spacecraft in orbit around the moon using laser altimeters and things like that, that was how you worked out that kind of stuff. It was an interesting activity. It took quite a bit of time to figure it out. And I actually got pretty close, if I recall. But again, nowadays, all that's been mapped by spacecraft, and we know the height of the moon probably better than we know the surface of the moon better than we know the deep floors of the oceans here on Earth, because it's actually easier to map the moon than it is to map the bottom of the oceans. Okay, well, I may have to go outside and do some adjustment here. If the weather improves a little bit, I will return to streaming. But for now, I think I'm going to end the stream so that you don't have to watch a really badly out of focus and blurry image. If things get better, I'll pop back. If you want to get notified when I go live, make sure you like the page and click on notify. And I try and go live as often as I can. But now that it's nice weather and now that I'm going to have a telescope permanently set up, it's going to be a lot easier. So join us and we'll explore the planets, we'll explore galaxies and nebulas and all sorts of stuff like that. I'm Scott, and it's been good hanging out with you, and we'll see you again soon.